the first question that I want to ask, so that we can just jump right into, I just want to ask, you are a very famous person. I'm starstruck right now. So maybe for someone else who doesn't know who Rikki is, who's just used to seeing you but doesn't know actually what you do, can you just say a few words and explain who Rikki Nathanson is?
So I am, as you say, I'm famous, and I think everyone knows the reason why I'm famous, the very notorious or case that was of the toilet case. They like to call it the toilet case in Zimbabwe. But besides that, because I'll get to that a little later on. Okay. Pardon me. So who is Rikki Nathanson? So I'm just really a normal, down to earth human being, trans identifying, male to female. I was born in a little town of Gwanda, believe it or not, Gwanda in the very south of then Rhodesia, now called Zimbabwe. My parents were both immigrants. My mother was from South Africa, my father was from Zambia. They were both in the teaching profession, and they moved to then Southern Rhodesia to pursue their teaching career. So, and they had a little farm out in Gwanda. So myself and my other siblings, I think about 3 or 4 of us were born in Gwanda. The rest were born in Bulawayo, the older ones, because I'm the last born of 9 children, all from the same parents. So that's why although I was born in Gwanda, I grew up in Bulawayo. When I was about 4 or 5 years old, we moved to Bulawayo because of the war. It was too dangerous for us to continue living in Gwanda, because that part of the country was really a hot spot with the liberation fighters and the army of Rhodesia. So we moved to Bulawayo. I was educated in Bulawayo. I did really well at school. I went on to be qualified. I'm a member of the Institute of Chartered Secretaries of Zimbabwe, and I hold a B.Commerce degree from the University of Cape Town. That's, I think, in a nutshell. I think we can go ahead and ask more questions.
Okay, so I just want to understand, what was your transitional journey, especially growing in an era whereby it was not something that was really common. A lot of people did not really embrace the idea of someone being a trans person, someone being a trans. So let's just get a feel of what your transitional journey was in that certain period in time, and what are some of the challenges that you encountered during that process?
Yes, obviously, and as you say, when we were growing up, being trans identifying was not even a term that anyone even heard or even understood. And growing up in a country that is so, and I would say is, because it still is so behind in its observance of an acknowledgement of anybody who seemed to be different to who they are. It was extremely difficult. So growing up, I always knew I was a different child. I always knew that I was, and to sound corny, I always felt I was born in the wrong body. People hear that phrase and think it's crazy, but it actually is the truth. And because when my first sense of being, and my first sense of realizing who I actually was, I was very, very confused why I wasn't allowed to play with dolls. And why couldn't, when we went shopping for clothing, why couldn't I buy that? Why couldn't I buy that dress that I wanted, that nice frilly pink dress that I wanted to wear, and I was forced to wear boys' clothing. So I was really confused. And as you grow up, you become aware of identities. So then I realized, okay, then I was gay, right? That's what I was called, because nobody knew at that stage that there was such a thing as as gender identity. It was all about sexual orientation. But then I always knew that I wasn't gay. I always knew that I really was a woman, and I am a woman. So my journey to transition was, I transitioned quite late in life. I actually transitioned in 2005, and I tell you why. Because up until that time, I worked. Like I said, I have a BCom degree, and I also am a member of the Institute of Chartered Secretaries of Zimbabwe. So I was working as a company secretary in a blue chip company that was then quoted on the stock exchange. So I could not at that stage come out as a trans woman, because then I would have lost my job. But when I reached the stage where I was financially secure and I felt that I could step out and do my own thing, I left formal employment, and I came out as a trans woman. I lived as a trans woman. My hair changed, my dress, my clothes changed, everything about me changed. Like my social expression was that of a woman. So, and that's when in the early 2000s, when the discussions around trans identities was really, really hot. I was then on the board of the Sexual Rights Center in Bulawayo, and through them and all the work that we were doing, I got to realize and acknowledge myself that this is what my identity actually was. But the journey wasn't easy. It's difficult. I mean, you're growing up, even as any queer person knows in Zimbabwe, you are harassed. You are called names. It really wasn't easy, but thankfully for me, I come from a very stable family background. So I had a very supportive family. That spans my parents and my siblings. Nobody ever denigrated me for who I was. They accepted me for who I was, and so that to me was I think one of the reasons why I've managed to be so well-rounded and to have lived through and gone through what I did, and even to achieve success academically, in the corporate world, and even now in my activism world, I'm blazing a trail. Because I think, and I really do believe that it's thanks to the support that I had and I still have from my family.
Now that you're a fully fledged activist, a lot of people, they know about your name, obviously, and people tend to look at you through a superhero lens and say, when I look at Rikki, I want to be like Rikki. I want to follow in the steps. But then, do
they?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Well, I'm saying it from my own personal opinion.
Okay.
So maybe just give me a few of what are some of the the measures that you've put in place in order to build a strong support system for yourself. Because I believe even up to now you still face certain challenges as a person, as you're still trying to grow, maybe professionally, maybe as an activist. So what are some of the measures that you've put in place so that you remain resilient towards those challenges?
I think one of the main things that I would advise anybody is you need to first of all know yourself, acknowledge yourself, accept yourself, and then also decide, now this is what I'm going to do and this is where I'm going, and then stick to that path. And in so doing, you are bound to cross paths with different people, different support systems. And then you need to be very savvy and very clever in how you are able to select those that are good for you and your cause or whatever it is that you plan on doing, and those that are bad, because we meet many good and bad people in our day-to-day lives and in the paths that we walk. Pardon me. So and I have been very fortunate in that I have met people that were number one supportive, people that were number two very, very, very bright, very, very knowledgeable, that I was able to sponge off, and also very influential. And so that's a good thing. And I did not really consciously go and seek those people. I would cross paths, and I was very fortunate in doing that. In also forging my pathway, I knew, once, because, and it also sounds corny. So I always knew I was destined for something. I always knew that something, I was on this earth to do something. And what happened in 2014 was just a testament to, okay, this is what I need to do. And even after the arrest in 2014 and that circus of the media and the having to be going to a safe house because I was afraid for my life, it was really scary. Actually, up until 2018, until the time that I moved to the United States, my life was in danger perpetually. I have family. I have a brother and a sister that live in England, and they kept on saying, "Why don't you come across to the UK?" And I said, "No, because I have work to do in Zimbabwe." And that's what led me to founding Treat, and being influential instrumental in forming the Southern Africa Trans Forum, and it's led me to where I am today, because it was that point, that was a turning point in my life where, even though it was to me it was the lowest point of my life ever, because, like I said, I've come from a good background. I've always done well at school. I've never been in trouble. I've worked at police, and then for me to have been arrested and to be treated so disgustingly, humiliatingly, to me was like the lowest part in my life. I mean, I went through, after that, I was at least 6 months to a year. I just went through a lot of trauma. But then I sat down and I thought to myself, okay, fine. So why has this happened to me? And that's the reason why I found a Treat. Because I realized it was necessary for people to understand that trans people exist. Trans people are here, and they're here for a reason. And they are just as human as everybody else. They are just as human as everybody else. They have the same rights. They have the same obligations. So why treat them any differently? And that's the reason why, to answer your question, this is how I have managed to navigate life and to get to where I am.
Okay, so you sort of answered the next question that I had, which was the build up to you, establishing Treat in 2015. Mm-hmm. So perhaps maybe you could just explain just a little bit more of what was the build up to establishing Treat. Was it maybe perhaps the lack of recognition for trans people within the LGBTI people in Zimbabwe? Because I believe from actually discovering the LGBTI as a movement, a lot of focus and attention was being paid to lesbians and gays, and not much was said within the discourse as in pertaining to trans people in Zimbabwe. So perhaps maybe, do you think that's one of the reasons that actually motivated you to establish Treat?
Yeah, you are partly correct. So that was that was actually one of the reasons. I won't say it was the main reason. So up until that point, I realized that there was a void when it came to speaking of trans rights, because everyone said glibly and globally, oh, LGBTI, but nobody paid attention to what each of those letters in the acronym actually meant and what it meant to the individuals that they represented. Okay, so there was a strong lesbian and gay movement in Zimbabwe. There was a strong sex worker movement in Zimbabwe for the key populations, quote unquote. And I don't like that term, to be honest. I'll just be honest with you, because it sort of makes us stand out from the rest of the population, but it is what it is. but there was nothing specific for trans people in terms of just like basic access to services. One of the root causes, one of the main reasons trans people's lives are so difficult are because of their incongruent gender markers. You have a document that says that you're male, but you're looking like a female, and you go look for a job and you can't get the job, and you're trying to catch an airplane, and you have a problem at the airport, and so on and so on and so forth. That's the number one cause. Number two, I also realized that at that stage, organizations were saying they were working on trans work, but not specifically, if you know what I mean. So they were getting funding for trans work, and they would have like a workshop, or they'd have like a little talk, a little commemoration on Ida Hot or whatever it was. But there's nothing specific that was saying, how do we tackle the system to change the system to accommodate and accept the trans identifying people? How do we get the conversation around legal gender recognition? How do we get the conversation around gender identity, around gender affirming healthcare, and all these sort of things? And then also after my arrest in 2014, that's when I realized that, okay, this is a danger that we all face, all the trans people face. And I would say not only in Zimbabwe, even being resident in the United States now, it's not easy as a trans person in the United States, and especially a trans person of color. But going back to Zimbabwe, so I realized that was the issue, and I used my situation and my story to found Treat and to advocate for the rights of trans people. And in the almost 4 years before I moved to the United States, I actually did a lot of work around trans rights. When I was there, I managed to get medical and psychosocial services for the trans people of Bulawayo. So we had a psychologist, and we had a doctor dedicated solely to treating and looking after the trans folks of Bulawayo, which is all funded through a grant that I got from an organization in South Africa. And I also did a lot of work around sensitization of the police and of the legal sector, because that's where it starts, And so TREAT was founded. So TREAT's acronym is Trans Research, Education, Advocacy, and Training. So TREAT's existence is really to advocate and train and educate people around trans rights in particular. And I was very specific that I didn't want to do HIV work, because everyone does HIV work. It's oversubscribed, and nobody looks. No, it really is, and nobody looks at the human rights components as to why do people have HIV. Why are trans women so susceptible to HIV? Because they get raped, it's violence and all these things. And what's the root cause of that violence? So people don't look at the root cause of why the disease exists. And that's what I was planning on doing. And I'm glad to see I'm still on the board of TREAT, so I'm still involved with the organization. I will be in Southern Africa next week. I'm coming up for 2 weeks. I'll be in South Africa. I'm implementing with my current job, I'm implementing a project across Southern Africa, of which Zimbabwe is one of the countries, and TREAT is one of the organizations. I'm still working quite closely with my comrades on the ground in Southern Africa.
Obviously, you mentioned about the struggles, the setbacks that trans people faced and that are still facing. But I believe the civil space is actually now getting a better representation of LGBTI people, because there are a lot of organizations that are actually sprouting from grassroots to represent, distinct groups within the LGBTI sector. But I believe, Zimbabwe in Africa is a continent. We have shared challenges, especially when it comes to LGBTI people. More or less, we are still facing the same challenges. But what do you think is perhaps one of the biggest challenges or challenge that we are facing as a Zimbabwe, even within our civil spaces?
So when you speak of civil society in Zimbabwe, I think of like what's the big NGO, Zimbabwean NGO organized, whatever, the body of non-governmental organizations. So that body of non-governmental organizations is meant to be non-partisan to politics, non-partisan to whatever's going on in the country. But you find that the governing body of the NGOs in Zimbabwe is still very, 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 very patriarchal, very using terms like culture specific and that sort of thing. So because of those prejudices, it spills over into the work that they do. It spills over into their relationships and their association with LGBTIQ NGOs. So you see what's happening in society is playing out in the NGO field in Zimbabwe. It still is. When I was still in Zimbabwe, I tried time and time again to get an audience with the Human Rights Council of Zimbabwe, and it was refused. So there again, that's testament and that's evidence of them still not being non-partisan. They still hold their whatever prejudices that they have. That's number one. Number two, it's not a very level playing field in Zimbabwe. Certain people have access to certain spaces, whereas other people don't. And I don't mean to sound tribalistic or whatever, but for those organizations in Harare, it's easier for them to operate because they're in that space with all the embassies and with all the funders, whereas those in Bulawayo, it's a bit more difficult. So there's that diversity as well when it comes to operating as an NGO in Zimbabwe. And then yes, conversations, things seem to be looking brighter for LGBTI rights in Zimbabwe. I mean, conversations are happening. People have reached out to me for comment. I know conversations are happening with certain political parties in Zimbabwe around LGBTIQ rights, but it's a long way. It's a start. It's a step. It's a couple of steps forward. But I don't think we're at the end of the tunnel yet. But yeah, so the problems that we face are, I mean, even if we do have to change the policies and the politics of the country, the issue is how do you change society to be in conformity with what the leadership is saying? And that is where the problem lies, because so much damage has been done over the years by the rhetoric and the anti-LGBTIQ rhetoric to the general population, that they've been brainwashed to believe that we actually are demons and we are lesser than. So we need to undo all of that before we can actually start looking at how best we can rectify the situation. It's a long exercise. It won't happen overnight. I certainly do not think it'll happen in our lifetimes, but it's a starting point. In maybe 50, 60, 100 years from now, things will be different. But it's encouraging to see that things are starting to change and the conversations are happening, which before it was very hard to be able to knock on a door and for them to open it to say, okay, fine, yes, let's sit down and have a discussion. So that really is encouraging.
Okay, so you residing in Zimbabwe for a certain period of time as a trans person and moving to the States, what are some familiar challenges perhaps that you still face, or what's your assessment of the situation or of the relations between LGBTI in Zimbabwe and LGBTI in the US? Comparing the two, do you find any consistencies between the two?
Oh yeah, the thing is that the similarities in the politics between the LGBTI organization in Zimbabwe is the same as it is in the United States. I mean, if you look at the hierarchy of power of the LGBTI people, the gay man is still at the top, and then the lesbian and so on, and the trans woman is right at the bottom of the hierarchy of power. And it goes across the board, from funding to services, to access to spaces, and so on and so on and so forth. For example, the pride organizations like DC Pride and LA Pride and New York Pride and Baltimore Pride and all these big prides, because they syndicated. It's a whole big, it's a business. Those are all run by gay and lesbians. And for trans people to break into that sector is really difficult. And I managed to break into Global Black Pride as the vice president of Global Black Pride. And I'm the only trans woman with lesbian and gay men. There's 5 of us in this management team, and I'm the one trans person, 2 gay men and 2 lesbian. So I think they're trying to get the demographics, politically correct. But it still is the balance of power is still in the favor of the gay men, gay white men, and then the gay black men, and then the white lesbian women, and then the black lesbian women, and then finally the trans identifying people. So it still is the same. It's very similar. The LGBTIQ organizations in the United States, very few of them have trans people like in senior management. I'm currently with Outright Action International, so that's across the board. So I'm a senior manager there. So and I head a global program, which is something major in the United States for a trans person to be in such a big international LGBT IQ organization and heading a global program. And there again, I was fortunate. But if I look at other organizations in the States, like GLAAD and those people, they're all still run by gay men and lesbian women. And then the trans people themselves have their own trans organizations in the United States. But the States is very segmented, state by state by state by state. So it actually mirrors what the political situation is of the United States, where each state has their own fiscal system, their own laws and legal system. It's the same with the trans organizations. So like the trans organizations in DC are not affiliated to those in New York, which are not affiliated to those in Boston and in California, and so on and so on and so on. So it's still very segregated in the United States. And another thing that I find, which I was totally surprised by moving to the United States, was the blatant racism in this country, across the board. So, and it really came to the fore with the George Floyd case last year, was the year before. That's when I got the wake-up call to say, well, this is what's going on. But then even in my first job, so I worked for a trans organization in DC, run by trans women of color. So it was cool. But then, because we were all trans women, and we were either Spanish, we were African American, or whatever we were. But then the interaction within the DC space itself was still very segregated against people of color, and in particular trans women of color. So when it came to funding from the DC government, who was our major funder, we got the least amount of money as compared to like the other lesbian and gay organizations that were white-led and white-owned. So it plays out in all sectors of society, and it's so intersectional and it's so cross-cutting that
when you grew up, during your journey, obviously you had certain people that you looked up to. Perhaps maybe there were icons back in your days who you looked up to, just like how some look up to you now. So like, what are some of the few names you've come across growing up?
And there's just so many people. There are just so many people in my life that have shaped my life and shaped my thinking. I've always been very inspired by strong women. People like Angela Mayo, and like now, I just finished reading. I'm also following Michelle Obama. She's very strong. She's very pro woman, pro Black woman. She's very strong in that sector. Also, but looking at like trans icons, I would say Marsha P. Johnson comes to mind. She was the Black trans woman who threw the first stone at Stonewall and was not acknowledged for her bravery until recently. Yeah, I mean, I would say her, and I'm trying to think of. Yeah, I think I'll stop there because I think that's because there's just too many I'm thinking of, and I just can't think of the reasoning why I like those people.
Anyway, by the way, I just forgot something that I was just starting to think now. So you changed your name legally to Rikki with a double K. You must be excited, eh?
Oh, I'm very excited, yeah. So I changed my name legally to Rikki with a double K-I. I changed my second name from Eugene to Anne, which was my late mother's name. So I'm Rikki Ann Nathanson. And I legally have changed my gender from male to female. So yeah, so I'm happy with my ID document. Okay. However, I got my green card recently.
Oh,
but that's not reflective of the change. So that's my next battle, is to fight now with the federal government, with the immigration system. I've gone through the state level, now I must go through that level. But it's a long journey, and even speaking to my lawyer, she was very, very, very angry and disappointed that that my green card was not reflective of the legal change, because I've changed everything. So what happens in the States is everything's tied to your social security ID. So once I changed my ID, I had to change my social security. I had to notify social security. So they changed on that system. It goes through the tax records and all that. So everything is like, it's all just like a chain effect. But then in the immigration system, I don't know why they didn't pick it up, and I sent all the documents to them. So my lawyer seems to think that it was intentional on their part. I mean, why? Probably because I'm an immigrant. And a person of color. And there again, it goes down to the racism aspect of what it's like in the United States. But then that's another battle. I'm getting assistance from high-level people, from our member of Congress, from the state in which I live. And then I also have reached out I have friends in high places. So I was at the White House on Wednesday. I was at a function with the Secretary of State on Friday. So I have like connections. So I emailed one of them this morning, and then so she's going to see what she can do, to see what we can do to fix it. Because my lawyer told me that it's a long process to have it changed. It's about 9 months, and I just can't afford to wait because I need to travel. I'm coming to Africa next week. So yeah. But yeah, I mean, at least I have my green card and my name is changed, my ID is changed. So very happy, very excited. I mean, there's nothing like when you walk into a place and you show them, because like, here in the States, you have to show your ID everywhere you go. And you show your ID and there's no questions asked. But they don't look at you like, why is your name like this, and why is the same male? But it's a great feeling.
And I think as Zimbabwe, I think we have a lot to learn in terms of providing those options for trans people in Zimbabwe, because I believe there's still a gap in terms of allocating, documents to trans people. that actually affirm their gender.
Absolutely, and people don't realize how important it is. It's just not a letter on a piece of plastic. It really is a person's life.
Because recently in SA, they introduced the gender marker X.
Mm-hmm.
So people thought that's an insignificant thing to celebrate about, but within the community, that was something that they were really proud of, to say, the introduction of that X as a gender marker, it actually comes after a long struggle. And I think
Absolutely.
countries,
yeah.
I think countries,
and this is, and I don't want to preempt anything by talking about it now, but this is one of the things that I will be pushing for in Southern Africa is legal gender recognition across the Southern Africa region of trans people. And that's hence my trip to South Africa next week. We're starting discussions on how do we do it, what do we do, how do we approach, government and that sort of thing. It'll be difficult, but it's doable. And I do know the conversations have started, even in Zimbabwe, around legal gender recognition. So we just need to sort of give it a push and make sure that it happens. And the thing is, I don't understand their reluctance and their reticence around not wanting to do it. I would say pretty much like what happened with immigration officials in the States, where people just don't care. They just don't care, and they just don't. To them, it's okay, fine. I've given them an ID. I've given this person a green card, so be it. But they don't realize the ramifications around just that one simple thing. Like now when I come to South Africa next week, I have to show my green card is saying one thing, and so it's all these things. Yeah, it's just going to be something.
So what would you say to just a young LGBTI person, or maybe an activist right now, who's actually within the movement and fighting within the trenches? What sort of wisdom do you have to share?
That's a very loaded question. I would say be resilient. Like when I started out with this conversation, know yourself, right? First, come to terms with who you are and accept who you are. And I promise you, the universe will open the doors. It will make things work in your favor. And stay true to the course. Yes, problems will be thrown your way. There's no way that you can do the sort of work that we do and live the lives that we sort of live, and not expect any sort of adverse kickback from society and backlash and all these ugly things, and being arrested and going to jail like some of us, but you just need to be resilient, and you need to know the cause. Find allies.
Yeah.
Allies are key. And also get a good support system around you, be it family, be it other like-minded people that can help you in advancing your cause. Yeah. But resilience is the key.
Okay, thank you so much, Rikki, for your time. I know you're a busy person, so thank you so much for your time. And I really appreciate you having a sit down with me and actually discussing about LGBTI and trans people. And it's been a lovely conversation with you. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. All right, thanks. Bye.